Would you rather have $1 million or would you feel at peace every single second of your life? If you ask people what they want, most people say they want to be happy and live a meaningful life. In today's episode of the Data Driven Actualization podcast, we talk about how you can excel, make sure you're giving it your all to your life while feeling balanced. Finding your own definition of excellence is super powerful because if you're going by someone else's definition, sure, you're going to work hard, sure, you're going to put your best effort, but at the end of your life, you'll be like, wow, I lived my life trying to do all this just because, when I was 8 years old, someone bullied me and I wanted to prove them wrong. As we do this, we discuss how to heal younger parts of yourself. You might have a very young part of yourself that says, I just want to date a bunch of girls. And then you kind of go deeper into that and you go, okay, what would it mean about me if I actually did that? Well, I would be cool. Okay, and what would happen if you're cool? Well, I would make some cool guy friends and I'd be accepted in my friend group. Okay, and what would that give to you? Oh, I would have a sense of belonging. So as we go deeper into the journey of what we actually want, we can find the value and move towards the value instead of the surface level goal that we think is going to bring us to value, which dating a lot of girls doesn't really give a sense of belonging. Find your own definition of excellence and listen to that higher self that wants you to go out there and do what you can in this world. I hope you enjoy this episode. And as always, please drop a like, share it with a friend. If you have any suggestions, drop it down in the comments below. Thank you for listening to this conversation. All right, welcome to the Data Driven Actualization podcast. This is Ege Reynolds. I am
This
here
is Numer.
with Mr. Numer with no last name. You know, there is one thing that's harder than actualizing yourself, and that is finding Numer a last name. But today, Mr. Numer, what are we talking about?
Yeah, this is motivated by a topic that came up recently, and it's how to excel in all areas of life while feeling balanced. And the reason I'm so excited about this is that this topic in my heart, it has a very open source feel to it, in that it's not going to be us sitting here pretending to be on a pedestal saying, hey, we've done it all, be like us. But really, it's a collaborative discussion that a lot of the concepts have had been kind of rumbling around my mind around this. And so I'm really excited to have a chat about this with you in this podcast today.
Awesome. So if you want to get what you want out of life and do it in a balanced way in this episode, that's what we're going to cover. So where shall we begin?
Yeah, so I think what's really a good place to start is the difference between excelling and getting what you want. Because I realized so many times getting what I wanted versus excelling, one's almost an internal idea
Mm-hmm.
and one's an external idea. So, what do I mean by that? In my fitness journey, I realized getting what I wanted, after going my ups and downs,
Mm-hmm.
was very different than excelling, quote unquote, because excelling would have meant single digit body fat, golden ratio, et cetera, right? But then what I realized was, well, what do I want? Healthy physique, looks good in clothes, exercises well, and I can age well with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so many times when we create this idea of excelling in every aspect of life, we're not really differentiating between what excellence would truly mean to us
Mm-hmm.
versus what we think we should want out of every aspect of our life. And sometimes because we're chasing someone else's dream, we end up causing ourselves a lot of suffering and making it a lot harder on ourselves. Versus if we just have clarity on what we really want, um, that's when you can really have balance and really have a lot of fulfillment and satisfaction as you work towards the journey.
Hmm. Yeah, and having the clarity in terms of what you want is a very intentional and active process. Like I just had a call with one of our one-on-one clients yesterday, and he's like, "Oh, I'm at this job and it's going decently, but it's not what I truly want. But then I don't even know what I want. So I'm putting in kind of okay efforts in this job because it's not what I really want. At the same time, I don't know what I want. So it's like, what do I do here, right?" And I think these days, with the amount of YouTubers, books, gurus out there, I mean, including ourselves, everyone has a message, right? So if someone doesn't take the time to figure out how can I find my own message and filter this person's information through what I want, then a lot of time ends up getting wasted because people look at what they want at a surface level. And this is actually one of the concepts in healing is like you might have a very young part of yourself that says, I just want to date a bunch of girls. And then you kind of go deeper into that and you go, okay, what would it mean about me if I actually did that? Well, I would be cool. Okay, and what would happen if you're cool? Well, I would make some cool guy friends and I'd be accepted in my friend group. Okay, and what would that give to you? Oh, I would have a sense of belonging. So as we go deeper into the journey of what we actually want, we can find the value and move towards the value instead of the surface level goal that we think is going to bring us to value, which dating a lot of girls doesn't really give a sense of belonging. Um, and I think that's where, as you said, excelling in what's important to you is very different than, going for what you want, but also getting caught up with other people's messages along the way. And like, if you're not spending time kind of questioning and contemplating a bit in terms of what you want, then it's normal not to know what you want. It's like if you've never spent time with this part of your psyche, how are you supposed to know?
Yeah. And I think, as you said, exploration is very vital to this, where at different stages in my life, if you would have asked me, what do I want? The answer would have been so different. And in many ways, it only got refined and narrowed down through experimentation, trying things, being like, okay, I don't want to do it anymore,
Mm,
time to switch. And as a result of trying different things, you're going to dislike certain things, but you'll also get closer to finding things that you genuinely enjoy.
hmm.
And I think something that really stands there is that just because you didn't enjoy something doesn't mean it was wasted time.
Yeah.
Because so much of my current skill set these days, I think, has just come from the fact that I tried so many things and then kind of connected the dots between them and created almost my own unique skill set based on all the different experiences I've had. And
Mm.
that's what makes my skills unique versus, if I would have considered everything else that I did wasted time, then that would actually make me feel like I hadn't gotten anywhere and would have really caused me a lot of pain to look at it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything you do, whether you know it or not at the time, I think kind of comes back in your own journey if you're going through that exploration process. Like if we look at kind of what's happened inside our mentorship group, a lot of the gamification principles when we were first implementing, I remember going like, oh, this is like when I used to play League of Legends and then I didn't like the game anymore. But because I was so attached to this cycle of reward and the social community and the surprise, like you get mystery gifts from your friends, oh, I still kept playing. So a lot of what I learned from that experience, which some people could consider wasting my life away playing video games, and in some sense that's true, but the positive that came out of that was we were able to use similar principles to build gamification more productively inside our program. So even again, this is not giving you
Role play games.
yeah, this is not giving you the message of like just do whatever you want and expect it to connect at some point. But it's more about if you look at your past and you feel there are certain things you wasted your time on, part of excelling is making those mistakes. You're not going to excel at life without going through periods of your own journey where you're not feeling like, oh, I'm wasting time. And sometimes you may feel, especially as you approach a more pluralistic perspective, where you start seeing the value in different cultures, different traditions, and just beings as a whole, rather than everything's about achievement, you may feel like you're excelling slower than you want. And there may be a part of you that may have resistance to that. But just like, if you watch a Formula One race, sometimes they have to do a pit stop, which seems like a waste of time. But what happens in the pit stop? They change the gears, and then next thing you know, the car's, rampaging through the race again. So we need those pit stops in our own life, and nothing is really a waste.
Yeah, and it's it's also fascinating because this whole idea of excelling, because the more I looked at a lot of my experiences, for example, I wanted to be world number one back in the day, in squash, and I was nowhere near close. Like I knew people who were much better than I was,
Mm,
and then I realized, well, maybe to some other people, my journey wouldn't have been excelling, meaning, they were probably already playing at the level I was playing at 10 years before I was ever there. But
mm,
then I realized, even though it wasn't it to them, it was to me because I truly got everything I wanted out of it, like out of my athletic career, the lessons I got, the experiences I got, those were what were really worth it. Like that was the first time I realized I could question a limiting belief and work towards it and overcome that in a realistic way. And so looking back, it really was that sure, it wasn't someone else's definition of excellence. And it wasn't even my definition of excellence at the time. But
mm,
now I look at it and I'm like, wow, I really got a lot out of that experience. And
mm,
so, again, I think the crux of it really comes down to having a more holistic point of view on what excellence means. Because if you pick what excellence means to you based on what every single person online or your family is saying, then it's going to make it a lot harder to be balanced. And, that was my experience even with the whole trying to get down to single digit body fats. It just made balance harder. And so, really, to me, balance also has to begin with really having clarity on excelling on our own terms.
mm. Yeah, and balance and excellence can kind of mean the same thing based on the value system you look at it from. And I think,
Yeah.
right now, especially in the Western world, we're in a very achievement focused culture, which is now transitioning more into understanding that every perspective is true in its own way and actually taking the time to look inwards. So when people grow up in a more achievement oriented culture, excellence just becomes attached to more achievement. So it's based on the value system as well. If we were to go to a farm in Poland, which I know you're very against going, but if we were to go to the farm in Poland, right, and just like see what people are up to, and we interviewed people on the street, people would probably be like, excellent is having a good wife and then being able to provide for her and then having a big family. And yeah, that's what excellence means. So I think that's one of the other things about having all these content creators and all these voices in our ecosystem is whatever they say, they come from their own belief system based on what they value at this stage of their life. So for you listening by looking at your own value system and almost poking around it a bit, you can see like what are you actually not including as your definition of excellence, right? Because if someone's very achievement oriented, what they may not include there is like how do you actually feel about your day-to-day, moment-to-moment experience? Like, would you rather have $1 million or would you feel at peace every single second of your life? And if you're picking the $1 million, then what does that actually exclude from your experience? Because why do people actually want that? To live a good life, right? But then if you have peace, you're kind of living a good life. So I think looking at all the different voices that are coming up in your ecosystem and going, what's the message this person's promoting? What can I take about how I want to create my life from their perspective? And what do I actually not want? And where are they exaggerating their message to sound more controversial and actually play into the YouTube algorithm and get attention? Because that's another thing as well, right? If someone's making content, a lot of the time their message can be very good, but the titling and the sub message can be quite crazy because that's what will get attention. And I think that's where finding your own definition of excellence is super powerful because if you're going by someone else's definition, sure you're going to work hard, sure you're going to put your best effort, but at the end of your life you'll be like, wow, I lived my life trying to do all this just because, when I was 8 years old, someone bullied me and I wanted to prove them wrong. Like people live their whole life that way, and that's a waste of energy. So I think by looking at what we actually want and really investigating the validity in everyone's perspective and taking on what we want while letting go of what we don't want because we don't have to take it all fully, we're able to create a more holistic definition of excellence. Because who's to say it's not excellent to live in a very peaceful life, or it's not excellent to live a simple life compared to a lavish life? We create that definition, but a lot of people have that definition created for them without even realizing that's happening. So you can take that definition back and go, what do I want this to mean to me? And that's kind of what you're alluding to in your journey is that definition changes, right? And the more inclusive it can be for every area of life, the more meaningful your life will become.
Yeah. And, I grew up in scenarios that really emphasized scholastic achievement
Mm,
over health, as well as like relationships and socializing. And
right.
that also shaped me in a way where I'd just be like, well, there's this deadline around scholastic achievement that I need to hit. Let me just have everything else go downhill.
Hmm.
And it's it's what's fascinating is that one, there's the side that's may not be your value. You're playing someone else's game. But the other side of it is in many ways, if you lengthen the horizon over which you're computing your achievement score,
Hmm.
you will, or have at least found that if you go too hard, like it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. If
Hmm.
you go too hard in one area, that will lead to typically a burnout.
Hmm.
And then you'll find that actually by living a balanced life over a long enough time horizon, you'll have much more achievement. And
Hmm.
so, even if achievement is the goal in itself, if you're looking over a long enough time horizon, living in balance is actually also the way, paradoxically, to increase the achievement in whatever area you're looking to achieve a lot in.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the second part was, I think this question has come up before where someone asked it to us is like, well, what if my definition of excellence is, um, sitting on the couch, never leaving my house, doing what I want when I want? What would you say to that?
Go ahead. See you in 20 years. We'll see how you go.
Yeah. Well, but I also think there's the other side is that that isn't there's always a different part of us that, or quote unquote the higher self, whose that is not the definition of
Hmm.
excellence for them. Like there's always that little voice in the head that's telling us, we can be better, we can do better, and
Hmm.
that it's okay to rest, but maybe there's something more that we could be doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's about, first of all, whose voice is that? Because sometimes people are doing their best, but then they have a belief that they took on from someone else saying, do more, you need to do more, you need to do more, you need to do more. It's not enough, keep going. And that's when I think a lot of people face burnout. And burnout is one of the biggest things that's coming up, I think, in social trends at the moment. Is like people are, quietly kind of just stepping away from their jobs because they're just done.
Yeah. What's it, quite quitting?
Yeah, I heard about that. It's crazy. And at the same time, although it's crazy, it makes sense because people are just tired of all these expectations. Now, I think there's also like every voice that we have, there's a shadow side to it that we can heal. And there's also the light side to it that comes from the genuine desire to live an authentic, meaningful life. Now, the shadow side could be when you were growing up, like you said, parents put a lot of emphasis on scholastic achievement. So maybe there's a bit of a shadow there. Like for me, it was the same thing. It's like just get the work done. My dad had his own business and he was working all the time. So when I started my own business, I would just work. And then I would sometimes take a rest, but if I took like 2 days away from my business, I'd be like, oh no, the business is going to collapse. Like, what's going on? I can't believe I took rest for this long. And, you and I have met people who take rest for 2 months and they're okay with it, right? So a lot of that also comes from kind of these beliefs that we took on from others. And sometimes they're beliefs that we took on from the environment. But yeah, there is a side to our our light kind of shining through and going, hey, you could be doing more. Like there's a life for you where you have this potential. So why not actualize it? And I think part of that also depends on a little bit of genetics, right? How industrious are you? Like the five personalities test from Jordan Peterson. One of the things that's quite interesting is you can measure your industriousness. And honestly, some people just have very low industriousness. So they're actually okay with doing less. And maybe they have the cultural voice of you should be doing more as a shadow, but they may not have as deep of a voice that's like, hey, do more. So again, I think in some sense, this journey really isn't for everyone. But if you've ever thought about, like, if you're watching this content and you've had the patience to sit through the beginnings of the podcast and you're seeing this consistently, there's probably a part of you that wants that. Otherwise, you just wouldn't be here. And I think that's where paying attention to that voice without putting judgment into it is so powerful. Because what people do usually is take it to the extreme. They either go, oh, I'm just going to achieve everything I want in my world until this voice just shuts up. Or they're like, well, whatever I do, I'm still going to feel this way. So what's the point? It's more of a defeatist attitude. And I think
Yeah.
the ideal way to look at it is to go, whenever you feel like you're destined for more, is that coming from shadow? Is that coming from light? And the way you kind of think about it is, does this voice actually make you shrink and feel vulnerable? Like, do you actually feel, man, I should be doing more, but you're also doing a lot still? If that's you, then that's probably a belief you took on from somewhere else, and you can heal that. Whereas if you're genuinely just, watching Netflix and eating chips and playing League of Legends, and you are unhappy with, like, if you're genuinely happy with it, I don't understand it, but I know some people are happy with that type of life. If you're genuinely happy with it, then good. But if you're not happy with it, the more you wait to make that change, the louder that voice speaks. Because that voice is a part of you that's like, come on, do something. And just like, if you had a friend in your ear just speaking to you and you're just like, yeah, whatever, bro, that friend would be like, bro, just pay attention. Come on, what are you doing? Just respond to me. We have internal parts like that. So that voice is going to get louder and louder and louder. And that's where most people's suffering comes from, is they're scared more of that internal voice than to actually go out there in the real world and to go, okay, let's actually play into this potential and see what we're made of.
Yeah. And, the point you make about genuinely feeling happy doing something, uh, no matter what it is, was a point made to me as well. Was, you know, we're not here to tell people to be a better AA or to be a better numer. Like we're not here to tell people how to be like us. We're here to help people be the better themselves.
Hmm.
And it's more about what does that clarity of being the better you look like to you. And it's going to look different for, you, me, other people. But it really is, as you said, if you're doing the activity and then you're feeling that internal tension, what can we do about that to help you tap into that tension and understand where it's coming from? So that way, at the end of the day, you feel a lot more whole and you feel a lot more at peace,
Hmm.
whether that is, getting after it, going for the big achievements, or whether it's chilling at home and, really enjoying a day off.
Yeah.
Because I realized for the longest time, I struggled to even take a vacation because
Oh,
I'd be
dude,
like,
me
oh,
as
I'm
well.
going to get to the beach. Yeah, I'd be like, I get to the beach and then what? And I had to
Yeah.
always fill the vacation with like, let me learn something, let me push myself. So we're not here to say one is right and one is wrong, but really we're here to say you are going to know which one is right and which one's wrong. And we're just here to help you tap into that.
Hmm. And the more you wait, once that clarity arises, usually the harder it becomes to make a change. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I've been coaching for quite some time now, and I have people who I've been in touch with from like 3 years ago, who first or 4 years ago, who reached out, hey man, I really want to change this in my life. Cool, we hop on a call. Eventually, they're like, oh, it's not the right time. Let's come back to it in 3 months. And most of these people's life, like out of hundreds of people I spoke to, maybe two or three actually made a genuine change in their life. And those two or three, I messaged them privately. I was like, dude, congratulations. Like, out of all the people who reached out to me who didn't end up getting mentorship, you're one of the few who actually changed your life. And I respect that. And I think that's where people end up wasting a lot of their life is they start contemplating like what is the best way, what is the perfect way, what is the most incredible way. At the beginning you don't need the best way, just find a way and do something and learn about it through the process. And again, although who you will become at the end is going to be different for your personality type, your interests, your passions, the pathway and the high level skills are still the same. Like there's again four areas from, Ken Wilber's work where it's cleaning up. We let go of unproductive patterns that are getting in the way of us living the life that we want. We do our healing work, go deep into the core wound and go where does actually come from. Based on the type of the wound, we realize how to let go of that. And as we do that, we just have less mental programs running in our mind. So whatever memory and CPU and RAM these are taking, we just go, we don't need this anymore. And we just run one extremely efficient program. That's the cleaning up. Then there's the waking up, which through meditation and spiritual practices, we understand the nature of reality, which is in some ways we're all connected, and in some ways reality is a lot more mysterious than we think. But we're also building the ability to spend time in states like states of love, states of equanimity, states of compassion, because whatever state we spend most of our time in eventually becomes a trait. Like if you spend, and actually a good example is like the average person spends their time in just stress. So what happens? They become a stressed person. Even the language mirrors it. First, it's like you have stress, then now you're a stressed person. Or
I am stressed. Yeah.
yeah, first you have anxiety, then you're like an anxious person. Even the language mirrors how these become traits. And we can actually have the opposite. Like, why is the default state in the world stress? What if it was love and peace? And that's what the waking up component allows us to do. Then there's the showing up, which is what you talked about, versus like the guy who's sitting on his couch versus the guy who's maybe afraid, even more afraid than the guy who's sitting on the couch, but who actually wants to do something about it. Even if you're the most developed person in the world, if you're just sitting on your couch all day, like you're not contributing to society. And in a sense, society around you is you because you're kind of projecting it. So you're not contributing to yourself. That's why showing up is so important. And lastly, there's the growing up where you can evolve into different perspectives and see more perspectives. Just like, when you're a kid, first you just think the whole world is yourself. That's why, like, babies can bite their own hand and then they'll start crying because they're surprised that it hurts, because they don't realize, like, oh, this is supposed to hurt. Or they may hit you with something because you have their toy. It's not because they don't have morality. It's because they actually don't understand there's other people around. Then you get second person perspective and third person perspective and fourth person perspective, where you slowly start seeing more perspectives. And as you expand your perspectives, then what happens? The definition of excellence and balance, these things evolve as well. Like when we communicate a word, you can only understand it from the perspective that you already hold. So evolving a perspective is kind of like, the strength guys gain when they go through puberty and suddenly they're like a lot faster and everything's like on steroids. That's what a perspective switch is kind of like for your mind. is you just become more and more and more inclusive of different perspectives. And that allows you to be a more efficient person. So now you're one program running efficiently in one direction, you're optimized your, I don't know, different threads running, and you can run more threads because you have more perspectives. And whatever decision you're making, it's very effective and efficient. And that's where, like, it's not about the decision you make, whether you do Muay Thai or Jiu-Jitsu or lift weights. It's just about what's the internal map you're building and how can we make it so accurate so that whatever life you want in your life, you can look at the map and go, this is what I need, and I'm going to execute.
Yeah. And, what you said about different perspectives actually reminded me of a cool kind of learning technique that I used to like to use a lot was
Mm.
if I had to learn a concept, I would try and learn it from multiple different points of view, and that would really help me internalize it. So, like systems of equations, you could learn it from like an algebraic perspective of adding and subtracting equations. You could learn it from the perspective of matrices, and then you could learn it from a geometrical perspective of spaces and planes. And actually, the more perspectives you learned it from, the more deeply I found I was able to understand a topic and more successfully navigate its nuances as well. And so, yeah, like perspective switching is very powerful.
Hmm. That's super.
Um, and then, yeah, so I think one question I have for you then is, at the end of the day, we want to live a more balanced and peaceful life. So how does advancing our perspective or advancing our ego development, how are all of those things actually going to get us to living a more peaceful life?
Mm. So, in some sense, a higher level perspective isn't necessarily better. It's just more
Yeah,
sophisticated. So it's kind of like what people said about, there's chemistry, you can make the atomic bomb with it, or you could use it to like really cure diseases. It's the same thing with perspectives. Like you can be at a very high level perspective and be quite malicious for the world. But the thing is, at a high level perspective, again, these areas are not separate. At a high level perspective, you like you'll start seeing how you're projecting everything. So if you start harming the world, you're also harming yourself because your sense of morality just usually
yeah,
extends to other people because they're not really other people, but that's a conversation for another time. So the way I look at it is it's about in like you can cultivate peace at each level, but at a higher perspective, you just have more tools to come to peace. And you can pick the tool you want to use. When you're solving
yeah,
like a math problem, if it's a very sophisticated problem, there's multiple angles to go at it from. Like if you're doing algebra, maybe you open up the first equation here, or maybe you actually do this part and then get to the second equation, right? It's the same thing with the different things that life throws at us. And with higher perspectives, we just have more ways to tackle it, which makes us more capable, but then also allows us to build better relationships with different parts of ourselves. Because
yeah,
more perspectives we have for the outside world, the more we hold that perspective on the internal world. Like someone who can see the value in taking a break and resting, it's going to be a lot easier for that person to love that part of themselves when they feel like they should be working more. Whereas if someone's just like achievement, 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 and you tell them, hey, maybe, send some love to the part of you that really wants to rest, they're like, oh, it's so unproductive. What? Why would I do that?
yeah,
That's where perspectives help, is you have more tools and you know how to use the appropriate tool for different situations, and that makes it easier to access peace. But higher perspective doesn't inherently bring up peace if you're not cultivating those states intentionally. That's where the waking up,
Yeah.
cleaning up really comes in.
Yeah. And a nice thing you said there is you can experience peace at every stage because so many times the usual narrative is, once I get to the single digit body fat, once I get the girl, once I get the promotion, then I'll have peace. And there's such a infinite treadmill like quality to this idea of achieving peace that's the dominant narrative, in
Hmm.
my opinion. But I think it's really worthwhile to see that you can be on the journey. And I think this was from a video that you showed me one time, that you can be on the journey, and as long as you're on the journey, because the journey never really has an end, you can choose to feel peace now instead of deciding to feel peace at the end of the journey.
That's right. And there's certain parts of the journey that have their own gifts you get to receive, right? Like even us doing this podcast is since our channel is relatively small, we can kind of just have some banter and mess around. And maybe we don't feel as much pressure to kind of filter ourselves. And I hope we don't feel that as we get bigger as well. But there's different gifts to every part of the journey. Whereas, like, if we were to talking to millions of people, then we'd have to consider a lot more perspectives around certain things. And I think that's, that's the fallacy is at every point in the journey, there's positives and there's negatives. And in a sense, some of the best parts of a process is at the beginning. Like
Yeah,
when I was facing my fears around socializing with people, the highest of the highs came at the beginning because I had so much fear that if I complimented someone, I was like, "Oh my God, how did I do that?" Whereas now, I'm
yeah,
like, yeah, I guess we have a conversation. So it's about
yeah,
extracting the gift from that part of the process and just really appreciating it. And that could be for anything. Like going back to the example, someone's working at a job that they're not really enjoying, but they don't know what to do for their life yet. Just extract the gift of, I'm going to build the skills now, the personal qualities in this job while getting paid for it. Instead of going, oh, I don't care about this job. So, I mean, why pay attention? It's like turn your current experience into a gift that you're receiving. And then the journey becomes more meaningful. Because most people, what do? They create a destination, they push the destination back. So they actually turn the journey into suffering. Because who decided on the destination? You. So you created a destination that separated you from the gift of the current experience you're having, that is making you suffer. What's the smart thing to do here? Understand the destination was created by you, let go of that creation, taking the gift from your current experience, and then still move towards the destination with the knowledge that you created it to begin with. So this doesn't have to be a monster that like holds you on the treadmill. Because if you want, you can go, hey, I created this. I can also just unmanufacture it.
yeah. And it's funny you say that because for the longest time, when I was learning to step into my fears, meet women, I always had like a magical number saying once I got 3 dates, that's what it meant. That that three meant that what I was doing was working. And I was like, wait, why am I like, who said three needs to be the number? Why not one? Or
Yeah.
why am I like just playing with this arbitrariness? And if I chose three, I can already choose one and say, wow, like this works. And, I think to wrap this up, what I think we're really saying is that this idea of excelling in every area of your life really is more about making a meaningful journey out of and meaningful to you, and realizing that as long as you're on that journey and you're working towards it, you're already excelling.
That's right. I think that's a great note to wrap up on. I know Mr. Numer has some coffee plans to excel on the journey, as they say.
Yeah, the excelling on the journey never stops.
That's right. Excelling never stops. But even
What's it? Go ahead.
here's the funny thing. Um, all those quotes like, oh, hustle never stops, right? It's very achievement oriented. Like in 20, 40 years, that will be like healing always continues or something like that.
Yeah. Or what's the other one? I grinded for this view.
Which one is that?
I grinded for this view. It's like people will show it from a skyscraper balcony, a view of
That's
the city, and then they'll say, I grinded for this view.
yeah. I mean, you could have just paid for an entrance fee at a downtown LA building, but sure, it's all about that grinding for the view. But then what does the view even represent? That's the other thing. Is like, again, what the view represent is either created by you or it's something created by someone else that you took on as meaningful. And I think
Yeah.
that's why looking inward saves so much time in a long enough time horizon, is because you don't spend 5 years like, when I was in Austin, I was living in a downtown apartment at one of the best buildings in Austin. That was one of the most empty periods of my life. So, and I knew that, right? And that awareness was actually what kept me to go, I'm going to rent my furniture. I'm not going to buy, yeah, thumbs up, rented furniture. I'm not going to buy unnecessary stuff because I know I'm going to travel again. And I think without the awareness, every environment and message has its own energy. Like in reality, trend surfing, the guy talks about the pendulum, right? And it's so easy to get caught up in that energy if we're not mindful, which is the message we're promoting here. Balance comes from being mindful enough to know what it is that you want, and then also building the skills and capabilities to go after it. So if you want that, go in the link in description and DM us on Instagram at Data Driven Actualization and ask us about our community so we can help guide you through this process. And outside of that, thanks for listening. This is Ege. Mr. Numer, any final notes?
Nope, that is all.
All right. Then this is Ege,
This is Numer.
and this is the Data Driven Actualization Podcast. Thanks for watching. Cheers, guys.